This is CNN Breaking News.
We're following breaking news. I'm Wolf Blitzer in the Situation Room. We're standing by for President Trump's former lawyer and fixer, Michael Cohen, to emerge from an hours-long closed-door House Intelligence Committee hearing. CNN has learned that Cohen provided new documents showing edits to the false statement he delivered to Congress back in 2017 about the Trump Tower Moscow project. He claims another Trump lawyer made the changes to that statement. Let's go straight to Capitol Hill. Our senior congressional correspondent, Manu Raju, is outside this closed-door hearing. Manu, Michael Cohen provided the Intelligence Committee with this new information. What are you learning about the changes that were revealed in these documents?
Yeah, we're going to hear from Michael Cohen probably momentarily, Wolf. His attorneys just left this closed-door session. We expect him to make comments. We'll see how much detail he provides. But we have learned from multiple sources that Cohen provided this committee with documents showing that his statements that he made, false statements to this committee and the Senate Intelligence Committee back in 2017, had edits. And this came after he alleged in a public setting last week that the president's attorneys had changed his statements that he made to Congress later to turn out to be false, and he pleaded guilty to lying about the Trump Organization's pursuit of the Trump Tower Moscow project back in 2017. He said that at the time that the discussions ended in January 2016, but then he later acknowledged they occurred through June 2016, later acknowledging that then candidate Trump played a larger role than what he testified to previously. Now, we've been told these documents give a further explanation about why he made that allegation in a public setting. We don't know exactly what those edits say, and we're hearing from Trump lawyers who are still pushing back at Cohen's testimony. Last week, they contended that it was a false statement made by Michael Cohen, said that the Trump attorneys edited the duration, the time frame that they discussed the Trump Tower Moscow project, where they're still standing by that denial, but these documents have been a source of discussions today behind closed doors. We'll see here, Wolf, in a matter of minutes when Michael Cohen comes out, if he decides to discuss anything that he said privately, and we'll see here potentially from Adam Schiff, the House Intelligence Committee chairman. He would not comment about this earlier today. We'll see if they decide to say anything about where they stand right now on the second day of testimony before this very committee, and the fourth time he's been on Capitol Hill in the last week and a half, Wolf.
Do you believe that Cohen also faced questions behind closed doors, Manu, about whether he actually discussed a possible pardon with the president's lawyers?
Yeah, I've been told that that has been a subject of conversation through the course of today. The extent to which there were discussions about pardons after Michael Cohen's properties were raided back in 2017. At that time, it was unclear what raided in 2018, I should say. At that time, it was unclear whether or not Michael Cohen was going to cooperate with investigators or still stand by this president. The question that Democrats have in particular is whether the president moved in any way to essentially convince Michael Cohen not to cooperate with investigators by suggesting there could be a pardon, whether there were discussions among the attorneys to have those about a possible pardon. Republicans have raised concerns that Michael Cohen may not have been truthful in his House Oversight Committee testimony when he said he did not personally seek a pardon. There have been reports about Cohen's lawyers discussing pardons with other of the president's attorneys. So that has also been a line of questioning going forward. We'll see how much more light he sheds on that. But those two topics, both the Trump Tower Moscow project pursuit, as well as discussions that the president may have had with Michael Cohen after the raid, all subjects of conversations behind closed doors today.
Yeah, as you say, we expect Michael Cohen to make a statement once he emerges from that room, and we also expect the committee chairman, Adam Schiff, to make a statement as well, maybe answer reporters' questions. We'll stand by for that. I want to bring in our senior justice correspondent, Evan Perez. Evan, Cohen, as we know, he lied to the committee before. He's about to begin 2 months from today a 3-year prison sentence, in part for lying under oath before Congress. What evidence did he bring today potentially that could back up his assertions?
Well, Wolf, according to the reporting from Manu and our team on Capitol Hill, he brought the documents, and the documents, he says, show the edits that were made by particular lawyers. Now, if you listen to the president's lawyers, they say that there were obviously some conversations between the lawyers, Michael Cohen's lawyers, and the president's lawyers, discussing his testimony. If you remember, the president's lawyers said that the only thing they had records of were discussions of the Moscow Tower project through January of 2016. It emerged later on, obviously, that those discussions extended much, much later. And so the question has been, who made those edits? Were they substantial edits? That seems to be the point of disagreement right now. We know that Michael Cohen talked a little bit about this on the Hill. I think we have that soundbite. If we could play that now?
You need to know that Mr. Trump's personal lawyers reviewed and edited my statement to Congress about the timing of the Moscow Tower negotiations before I gave it. Mr. Trump made clear to me, through his personal statements to me, that we both knew to be false, and through his lies to the country, that he wanted me to lie. And he made it clear to me because his personal attorneys reviewed my statement before I gave it to Congress.
And Wolf, we obviously talked to the president's lawyers, Jay Sekulow in particular, who is one of the lawyers that Michael Cohen talked about in his testimony last week. And Sekulow said in a statement last week, they say they stand by the statement. They say, quote, the testimony by Michael Cohen that attorneys for the president edited or changed his statement to Congress to alter the duration of the Trump Tower Moscow negotiations is completely false. Again, they're sticking by this previous statement. Well, so it's going to be, I guess, a test to see whether or not members of Congress believe Michael Cohen today and whatever documents he's producing to show those edits, and whether or not they believe those edits, those changes were substantial and essentially helped Michael Cohen tell a lie to Congress, which of course Michael Cohen has now admitted to.
And Michael Cohen says he knew it was a lie when he made those statements, but he was honoring his commitment to Donald Trump. And he keeps talking about lawyers, not just a lawyer like Jay Sekulow. He keeps mentioning lawyers. Could those lawyers be in trouble if they knew what they were editing, what they were changing in his statement was false?
Well, yeah. I mean, if you know that someone is lying and you knowingly help them make that lie, tell that lie to Congress, then you could also be in trouble, Wolf. And I think that's where this is going to fall, is the issue of whether or not you believe Michael Cohen, whether or not there's any way to prove who made those changes to the documents. I assume that Michael Cohen and his legal team believe that they have documentation to show who may have made the changes to the documents. Obviously, that would be a big deal if the president's own lawyers, in this case, Abby Lowell, who represents Jared and Ivanka, who was part of this conversation and who allegedly made some of these changes, according to Michael Cohen. Whether those people end up being in trouble, I think it's going to be up to the Democrats on the Hill to see whether they want to hear from those people in the coming weeks.
And the whole notion of whether or not a pardon was discussed between Michael Cohen's lawyers and the president's lawyers at a time when Michael Cohen, his office, his hotel room, his home had just been raided by the FBI. The president was angry about that. And supposedly shortly thereafter, there were some conversations about a possible pardon. Right.
Look, I mean, I think this is a fascinating part of this discussion, of this investigation. The question is there someone who broke the law here? Did the president or his attorneys or anyone else break the law by having this discussion? Look, what we know is that the president obviously has plenary power over pardons. That's his power. And so what is unusual here is obviously for the president to be a subject of an investigation, right? That's not usually part of the discussion. So what you talk to the president's lawyers and people around him, they say there's nothing wrong for the president to be having a discussion about a potential pardon, and that this is just the Democrats trying to create a crime where there isn't one. We don't know, Wolf, where prosecutors in New York are on this. Michael Cohen seems to be suggesting that there is an investigation in the Southern District of New York that is looking into this. We know the Democrats are very, very much interested. But I think the question of whether or not it's inappropriate for the president to have a conversation like this, I think it's very much up in the air. And I think we're going to have to see whether there's more facts that are brought out that show the president violated any kind of law here.
I want to go back to Manu. Manu, we're standing by, waiting to see Michael Cohen emerge from that closed-door hearing with the House Intelligence Committee and also the chairman, Adam Schiff. He's expected to emerge, make a statement, and answer reporters' questions. All this happening, Manu, as the New York Times is reporting on 6 checks the president signed while president of the United States for Michael Cohen. We're showing our viewers those 6 checks right there. Tell us why this is significant.
Yeah, you'll recall at that testimony before the House Oversight Committee last week, Michael Cohen provided one of those signed checks from August of 2017. Of course, after the president was sworn in to office, when he's been president for several months, showing that the president, in Michael Cohen's words, was engaged in this criminal conspiracy involving this hush money payments, keeping quiet these allegations of affairs that were about to come out right before the elections. He tried to make the case that the president was directly involved, signed at least one of those checks that we saw last week from his own personal bank account. The New York Times got its hands on several other checks, six checks showing that the president was more deeply involved than he has certainly let on personally, and that essentially backs up what Michael Cohen had been alleging in his testimony. Now, this is going to be one big focus of perhaps not this committee that's meeting right now with Michael Cohen, is finishing up its discussion of the House Intelligence Committee. But I can tell you the House Judiciary Committee, the House Oversight Committee, both those two panels want to make this one key aspect of their investigation going forward. As earlier this week, when Jerry Nadler, the House Judiciary Committee chairman, sent letters through to 81 people connected to the Trump world, he also was focused on trying to get information about these hush money payments that were going on, including from David Pecker, who was the head of the parent company of the National Enquirer, which of course was engaged in that so-called catch-to-kill scheme to silence at least one of those stories involving the president and his alleged affair with former model Karen McDougal. All those matters are bound to be part of the investigation by Democrats and other committees. We'll see how much they discuss of that here. They had their hands full dealing with all the Russia questions today, but those questions still bound to consume what Democrats want to look for going ahead. We'll see how much cooperation they get in getting any new documents that they've been asking for, particularly from some of those people who have been involved in these hush money payments, including potentially the president's eldest son, Donald Trump Jr., whose name was signed on one of those checks that Michael Cohen provided last week.
I'm going to have you stand by, Manu. Evan, stand by as well. We're waiting to see the witness in this particular case, Michael Cohen, emerge from that closed-door hearing. We're told he will make a statement. Joining us now, Democratic Senator Richard Blumenthal of Connecticut. He's a member of the Senate Judiciary Committee. Senator, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
If I interrupt, you'll understand that we want to hear what Michael Cohen has to say, what Congressman, the chairman, Adam Schiff, has to say. I'm sure you will understand. But let's talk about Michael Cohen for a moment. He claims the president made it clear to him he was expected to lie under oath to Congress about that Moscow Trump Tower deal, and that his legal team reviewed and actually edited the statement ahead of time. Do you expect these documents to support that claim?
These documents certainly are expected to support it. They provide corroboration. Michael Cohen obviously has some problems with his own credibility, having lied to Congress, and now he's explaining that lie and involving not only the president's lawyers, but the president himself in his contention that the president, by code, by implicit encouragement, led him to lie. And the important point here is we're reaching a moment of reckoning for the lawyers who are normally protected by attorney-client privilege. If there's a fraud or a federal felony, that privilege goes out the window, and they're going to have answers now they'll have to give to congressional committees and perhaps to grand juries.
What should Congress do with this information?
Congress has to hear from those lawyers. It has to review the documents because they provide essential corroboration. There is other corroboration, like the checks that have been produced with Donald Trump's signature, the statement about the timing of those checks while Donald Trump was actually in the Oval Office as President of the United States. So the reliability of Michael Cohen's testimony has been vastly bolstered by documents that he's now producing and others that he may offer in the future.
Could this evidence be used in a potential impeachment hearing?
This evidence can be used in a potential criminal trial, in a potential impeachment proceeding, in any proceeding where it can be offered with a chain of custody and other legal conditions and requirements that have to be imposed. But it is certainly usable in any legal proceeding.
You're a former prosecutor. How do you think the special counsel, Robert Mueller's team, is handling this evidence?
Robert Mueller knows everything that Michael Cohen is telling to Congress because he has very, very comprehensively had Michael Cohen answer questions. And so Robert Mueller is handling this evidence, giving it the reliability it deserves with great care, close attention, and using it. And now it will be for Congress as an oversight mechanism to establish that members of the president's team may have condoned, encouraged, suborned improper conduct, indeed perjury, before the United States Congress.
Which is a serious potential crime. From a legal perspective, Senator, does it really does it matter that these edits were allegedly made by the president's lawyers and not the president himself?
What needs to be established is what the president knew and when he knew it, and what conversations took place between the president and his lawyers. But remember, Wolf, it's not only edits or changes, it's the mere review of that testimony with knowledge that it is false. In other words, if they let Michael Cohen go ahead or encouraged him to give that testimony knowing it was false, they can be held responsible legally. It's not the edits or changes or even the conversations with the president, but the president may be directly implicated if he knew, simply if he knew, that his lawyers were going to suborn perjury.
Do you think members of the president's legal team, as a result, could be in legal jeopardy?
They definitely could be in legal jeopardy because there's no defense for a lawyer to say he was simply representing someone if he or she is suborning perjury. There's no attorney-client privilege, there's no executive privilege, there's no privilege whatsoever. Nobody is above the law.
What about these checks that Donald Trump, President Trump, as president, reportedly signed to Michael Cohen? He did so while he was president. That's what the New York Times is reporting. What's your analysis? What's your reaction when you see these 6 checks?
The analysis has to be these checks are very, very powerful corroboration. That is, support circumstantial evidence that Donald Trump knew about the payment of hush money, that he was involved in the potential fraud. Obviously, Michael Cohen's testimony last week opened a Pandora's box for Mr. Trump because it implicated him in potential bank fraud and insurance fraud in New York. Those matters are under investigation by New York authorities and by potentially the Southern District of New York grand jury. But those checks further bolster Michael Cohen at a time when Republicans have no defense. They offered none except the potential lack of credibility for Michael Cohen. So overall, they fit into this mosaic, pieces of a picture that, coming together, show that the walls are closing in on President Trump.
Senator, as we await Michael Cohen to emerge from that room, we see a Capitol Hill police officer emerging right there. I want to quickly get to some other important news that we're following. CNN has learned that President Trump pressured White House staff to grant his daughter Ivanka a security clearance over the objections of career professionals. What concerns, if any, does that raise for you?
For me, that story is of equal concern to the Michael Cohen testimony because it is deeply dangerous and wrong for the president to overrule the security clearance professionals and his intelligence community that essentially said Ivanka Trump cannot be trusted with this top secret or classified information. There's a system in place that is there for a reason, to protect the nation's security. And I actually raised these concerns more than 6 months ago. I asked that Jared Kushner's security clearance be reviewed, then a separate letter with a number of my colleagues asking that his interim security clearance be suspended because of his contacts with the Russians, his financial dealings with others, his financial debts, a number of red flags, public even then, and now we know the president personally overruled his security clearance professionals with respect to both Jared Kushner and Ivanka Trump. And I think there's a lesson here, which is the president's apparently vast authority over security clearance needs to be constrained. There need to be legal constraints on the president's security clearance powers to overrule his professionals.
But he controls security clearance. He has the legal right to give anyone top secret security clearance if he so deems.
Good point. And that's the reason why I think Congress needs to begin an investigation of what happened here and what can be done to prevent these kinds of dangers to our national security. Remember, as you well know, our intelligence professionals risk their lives to protect our nation. Those secrets that they gather, including their sources and methods, are of tremendous value to our enemies and adversaries. Simply talking about them in the wrong place at the wrong time can imperil our nation's security or our military men and women in harm's way or others who are gathering that intelligence. So there are sweeping ramifications to overruling the intelligence community when it says there are red flags here, security clearance should not be granted.
Senator Blumenthal, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
I want to bring in our political and legal experts to assess all the breaking news. We're waiting, Susan, for Michael Cohen to emerge from this closed-door hearing. He's been there since, 9:30 this morning. The fourth time he's appeared before a congressional committee, 3 times behind closed doors, once in open session before the House Oversight Committee. How significant is the new documentary evidence that he brought to the committee today?
So I think it potentially is quite significant, in part because Michael Cohen isn't somebody with a lot of personal credibility. He has a really significant allegation, right, where he's essentially said that the president was aware that he was going to submit false testimony to Congress, and that the president encouraged him to do so, not directly, but by having these lawyers edit it and having him then send it to Congress. And so I do think that it's significant that he's now proving, look, these lawyers edited it, and they edited it in a particular way, and I can actually demonstrate precisely what they said and did. And so we still would need to know that the president was aware of the content of that statement. We would still need to know that by returning those edits, the president or his lawyers intended to encourage Michael Cohen to actually submit that testimony. I think it's a common sense conclusion, but we would still need to sort of establish it. So it's not all the way there, but I do think that what we're starting to see is sort of meticulously building the pieces of corroboration for Michael Cohen's really bombshell story.
Well, because potentially it could be obstruction of justice. Is that what we're talking about? Yeah,
so it potentially is obstruction of justice. So Michael Cohen said that the president did not directly say, I want you to lie to Congress. But suborning perjury, it doesn't require actually that direct command, right? If the president was aware that Michael Cohen was preparing a false statement, and if he did anything to encourage Cohen to submit that to Congress, that is suborning perjury. That is precisely the type of obstruction of justice that resulted in Bill Clinton's impeachment.
You know, Phil, I have to assume that Robert Mueller, the special counsel, and his team, they know everything that's going on right now behind closed doors.
Yeah, there's a couple of basic questions you have here that I wish I knew that they know already. We're trying to judge what's going on. Let me give you one. So we got multiple checks here signed by the President of the United States. He didn't cut those checks. I assume somebody like Mr. Weisselberg, that is the CFO of the Trump organization, cut those checks. If you're doing an investigation, let me give you one question. Mr. Weisselberg, why are there repeated checks for $35,000? And he's going to tell you those checks are or are not to pay off a porn star to keep her quiet. So we can speculate about this. The special counsel knows this already. Let me give you another specific example. Let's say there's an interview between Jay Sekulow, who allegedly interfered with the statement made by Michael Cohen, an interview with the special counsel, and he says, I never had anything to do with statements made by Michael Cohen. And now you find out there's an edited version of a document that suggests that Jay Sekulow lied. That's a problem. So what I'm saying is I think the special counsel has a lot of evidence we don't know that takes us one way or another, guilty or not guilty in these cases.
Yeah, and the special counsel knowing it and having it is one thing. The new House majority, which may or may not be building a case toward impeachment, obviously that would be the most extreme decision that they make. And in the shorter term, building a case for what they consider basic oversight that has been lacking is something quite different. The other thing is that it's still unclear, even if Robert Mueller has this information, which it's hard to imagine he does not, Congress would get it because we're not sure what's going to happen with the Mueller report with regard to how it's written, but also all of the materials that went into his investigation, whether anybody in Congress would see it. So they believe that, that this is their not just their right, but their obligation to get this
because Mueller would submit the report to the new Attorney General, Bill Barr, and it's up to Bill Barr to decide what to make public from that report.
I mean, but the difference that Dan is pointing out between the impeachment lane and the Mueller lane is very important, because the White House and the president's lawyers have been making an argument that the president didn't break the law technically, that he didn't do anything wrong according to the sort of the ink on the paper, the letter of the law. And that may or may not be true. I think that's not going to be adjudicated in Congress. But what is going to be whether the president is actually believable. And I think that there's a lot of evidence right now that he is not, and that even if people don't know whether or not he actually broke the law by encouraging Michael Cohen to lie to Congress or doing any other thing, there could be this perception that is put out there by all these questions being raised, that the president is involved in a elaborate scheme of deception. And I think that's problematic politically. It may or may not lead to impeachment, but it's certainly grist for the mill for that process as it goes forward in the next 2 years.
Because the Justice Department guidelines are, Susan, that you can't indict a sitting president. But there's no such guidelines for the House of Representatives to begin impeachment proceedings. If they want to do so, you can begin impeachment proceedings for a sitting president.
Right, exactly. So the name of the game here was always going to be impeachment. Now, ordinarily, Congress doesn't consider impeachment unless they believe the president has broken the law, whenever we've seen historical impeachment. That said, whenever they're deciding if the president broke the law, they aren't trying to prove it beyond a reasonable doubt in court. They're trying to determine for their own purposes whether or not the law was broken. So I do think what we're going to see with this new House is sort of more muscular oversight that is, we see right now the president's lawyers sort of attempting to use some sleight of hand, right? They're saying, Michael Cohen, we deny that we edited this statement to change the duration of the Trump-Tower-Moscow negotiations. Now, that's not what Michael Cohen accused them of. He accused them of editing the document in which he lied about the duration of that. And so any kind of involvement, whether or not they inserted a lie substantively or not, the mere fact that they were aware that the president's former attorney had drafted a false statement that he intended to submit under oath, that involvement is enough to meet, I think, the common sense sort of threshold that Congress is going to be deciding whether or not they think it could be proven in a court of law.
What's Congress going to do? These lawmakers, what are they going to do with this new evidence that Michael Cohen brought to the House Intelligence Committee hearing today?
Well, exactly. I think what we're talking about, potentially build the case. There's Michael Cohen.
All right, here he comes. Here's Michael Cohen. Let's listen to see if he stops.
The hearings went very, very well. I believe that all of the members were satisfied with the statements and the responses that I gave to them. I told them that any additional information that they would want, they should feel comfortable to reach out to my counsel, and I would continue to cooperate to the fullest extent of my capabilities. So thank you all very much for being here today. Thanks so much.
January 2016.
And there you see Michael Cohen, Dana. He's making a brief statement. This supposedly was his last formal appearance before a congressional committee 2 months from today. He's supposed to begin a 3-year prison sentence.
That's right. And what he just said there is a reminder that what happened last week with his initial testimony behind closed doors, and more importantly, for the public grist, as you mentioned, the public hearing, that he set Congress out on so many different threads, investigative threads, to go down. And what he endured the whole time from Republicans was, well, wait a minute, you're not credible. And, they have a point in that he is going to jail in part because he lied to Congress. So what he's...
Thank you all so much for coming.
Hold on, he's still talking.
Everything went very well. I believe that they're happy with my responses. It's been a long day. It's been a long couple of days. But again, I believe they're happy, and I have given them my assurance that any additional information that they need, I'm here to cooperate and will continue to cooperate. So thank you all very much.
There's Michael Cohen, followed by his lawyer, Lanny Davis, emerging a second block of reporters waiting up on Capitol Hill to get a
We're everywhere, Wolf.
At first he said the lawmakers were satisfied. Now he says they're happy. This is a an extensive process that everyone is going to be going through right now, especially White House officials who are watching this so carefully.
I noticed that Michael Cohen said everyone was satisfied. I doubt everyone was satisfied. There are Republicans on that committee who are not particularly happy with him. And yes, the White House is going to be not only scrutinizing what he said last week, but, talking to the members that they're close to on the committee about what they need to be aware of going forward. But it's been interesting to see the White House not really getting into the nitty-gritty details on this. They are not disputing the facts of what happened or what might not have happened. And that's very telling. They're going after Michael Cohen as a person. They're trying to attack his credibility as a person. The president is pointing people to this book manuscript that he tried to peddle over a year ago, but they're not dealing with the substance. And that can be a problem for them because, as we've been discussing, Michael Cohen threw a lot of things out there, and it's enough, really, to fuel several committees for many, many months to come with oversight inquiries.
Which is why coming back with what he says is evidence to back up some of the things that he was talking about last week. It is really critical because of the kind of witness that we all know he is, that Congress knows he is, but also given all of the different elements of investigatory, pursuits that Democrats who run the House already are taking and running with, never mind what we know that they're working on within the Justice Department.
We expect the committee chairman, House Intelligence Committee Chairman Adam Schiff, to emerge momentarily. I'll also make a statement that answer reporters' questions. We'll see what he has to say. So where do you think this is heading?
Look, I think that Dan is absolutely right? Congress is now off on a million different investigative threads, and we're going to see where we wind up. I think one thing, it's important to sort of take a step back and realize that this is an incredibly significant moment. The president's former personal lawyer, someone who was very much in the inner circle, has sat down under oath after already having been sentenced to 3 years in prison. The person who understands better than just about anyone the consequences of lying to Congress, and accused the president of committing multiple crimes while he was president of the United States. So while we've seen that the House of Representatives has tried to be very, very restrained, Nancy Pelosi has really not wanted to get out over their skis in terms of the talk of impeachment. At some point, they are going to have enough evidence before them that they're going to have to make a decision about whether or not this is an individual who is fit to continue to serve as the president of the United States, and whether or not we do need to move, towards impeachment.
It's interesting. Today was the day, March 6th. He was supposed to begin his 3-year prison sentence, but that was delayed for 2 months, in part because he had shoulder surgery, but also in part because of the hearings up on Capitol Hill.
Yeah, and everybody is happy and satisfied for a guy who has lied in almost every testimony he had before the last week. If any congressman comes out and says they're happy or satisfied, let me play Wolf Blitzer. Let's go. Let's talk. Let me give you one specific example. He talks about the payments to Stormy Daniels, and he lays out documents, as he should, because nobody should trust the guy. One question for Congress, and this is why we trust Mueller and we don't trust Congress. Mueller's going to talk to 100 witnesses, and Congress is going to talk to one and say, he gave us a story we liked, so we'll listen to one question. Did you subpoena the chief financial officer? Did he speak to you from the Trump organization? And did he explain why he cut those checks, as I mentioned a moment earlier? If they walk out and say they're satisfied after a man who's a perpetual liar spoke before him, I want to say that's why I don't trust the process. That's why I trust Mueller. I don't believe these guys.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really important point about the process here. The Democrats have to thread a needle. They cannot just simply take Michael Cohen's word just because right at this moment it's convenient. If they're not laying out a process that seems to be thorough and seems to be actually seeking information and not just trying to make political points, they're going to lose public trust as well. The Mueller investigation went on for as long as it did, and the trust in the Mueller investigation even eroded over time as the president continued to attack it. So there is risk here for Democrats, and they have to tread very carefully.
Well, other committees, Dana, in the House, they're seeking evidence, statements, emails, records from 81 individuals and entities, including Alan Weisselberg, the chief financial officer, for some 40 years of the Trump organization.
That's right. And the question is whether or not they're going to be able to get the answer to that legitimate question, important question that Phil put out there, which is, what about all the other players who are less inclined to talk than Michael Cohen? You know, they subpoenaed this information, interviews, documents, what have you. It doesn't mean they're going to get them. There could be, and probably will be, a lot of court fights that will go down the road with a lot of these individuals, probably including maybe even especially Trump organizations, since that is and always has been the president's red line. And the people who work there understand that they're going to have to go kicking and screaming to giving information over to Mueller may be one thing, Congress may be another.
At some point, they're going to release the transcripts, according to Adam Schiff, the chairman of this committee, of what he said, Michael Cohen, behind closed doors. And that'll be fascinating reading, 7, 8, 9 hours of closed door testimony.
Right. So once again, I think I don't know that Cohen is likely to have revealed new information, right? He's told his story pretty publicly at this point. At this point, the name of the game is all about corroboration. What can he prove? What can investigators actually identify? To Phil's point, I think it's important that we understand that Mueller has a different job than Congress. Mueller's job is to investigate, to find any criminal behavior, and to see if any individual should be charged with specific crimes. That's not only is he limited in his his subject matter mandate, the actual job he's doing is a more limited job. Congress has a completely different responsibility before them. They have a much larger set of crimes that are potential crimes or inappropriate behavior that they have to investigate. And they, of course, are not.
Hold on a second. Here's Adam Schiff, the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee.
Good evening. I just want to make a brief statement about Mr. Cohen's testimony today. We had a very long day with Mr. Cohen. This was, of course, the second day before our committee. He answered every question that was put to him by members of both parties. He was fully cooperative with the committee. We had requested documents of Mr. Cohen. He has provided additional documents to the committee. There may be additional documents that he still has to offer, and his cooperation with our committee continues. So I think the members found it an enormously productive session, and we're very grateful for the time it went on. Obviously a lot longer than anticipated. We expected we would have one day of testimony, but there was more than enough questions for him to last well through a second day. So again, very productive day. We will fill you in on further witnesses and testimony that we anticipate, but 2 long, hard days, and again, we appreciate very much his cooperation. Thank you.
Attorneys aboard perjury.
The original date on the original draft is January 2015.
Clearly, Adam Schiff, Dana, very pleased by what he heard today, the second day of testimony behind closed doors from Michael Cohen. He said several times, a very, very productive day.
Very productive day. But Phil made an important point earlier. Look, these are still partisan politicians. They just are. And so the question is whether or not he comes out and says that. Presumably, the top Republican will say something quite different. And at the end of the day, in order to have a really credible process, the facts are going to have to speak for themselves. He's not ready to give the facts yet, but the facts have to speak for themselves. And, it would be wonderful. I know this sounds super Pollyanna, but it would be wonderful if these political figures could find a way to come together and do this in a way that would give the American people more satisfaction that there is credibility and it's not just, a partisan investigation, depending on where you stand, that's where you sit.
But let's keep in mind, for the past 2 years, sort of Schiff's partners on the other side of the aisle have been doing absolutely everything they can to avoid investigating these actual issues, instead trying to divert attention to investigating the FBI, the Hillary Clinton email investigation. And so now, really, for the first time, we're seeing the congressional investigations, which may have formally existed for 2 years at this point. They really are, in a meaningful sense, only a couple months and weeks old. And so I think what we're seeing now is, these members that have spent so long feeling very, very frustrated about not being able to pursue those leads, not being able to get answers. Part of their satisfaction certainly isn't the substance of finding out what that might, sort of potential wrongdoing, but instead sort of finally actually being able to get answers and hopefully produce them to the American people.
Adam Schiff is the chairman of this committee. Devin Nunes is not the chairman of the committee anymore, the Republican. As a result, there's a whole new game in town. Manu Raju, you're there outside that committee hearing. What are you seeing? What are you hearing?
Yeah, Adam Schiff coming out just moments ago, not taking any questions, but making it pretty clear, Wolf, that he's been satisfied with these 2 days of closed-door testimony with Michael Cohen, saying that he expects additional cooperation from Cohen going forward. They say he acknowledged getting new documents today from Cohen, said that he expects additional documents going forward. He would not respond to any questions, which is unusual. He usually does take questions, but I tried to ask